I'm going to hand over to Sabu to do the welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Yeah. My name is Boo, and I'm currently with Iranti in Johannesburg. And I want to welcome all the participants. And I want to also express my appreciation to our panelists for today's topic. For panelists, we have Sandy Ndelu, and Sandy is currently with Carl's at Wits University, and she works as a candidate advocate. But some people know Sandy as a fallist, because she was very active during the Fees Must Fall, and she's also a co-founder of the Trans Collective at UCT, and further on, she founded the Trans University Forum. So Sandy is going to be one of our speakers today. And thank you, Sandy, for being available at a very short notice. I appreciate that. I also appreciate Jenna's present. Jenna is a counseling psychologist, and she's a trainer and an activist. And Jenna is very, very vocal on issues of transgender rights. So those will be our two speakers for today, and the rest of us will join in the conversation after their presentations. And the conversation will be facilitated by Anil. Anil works for Gender Dynamics as a health advocacy officer. You would know by now that today's topic focuses on body shaming. We felt it was a very important topic, given that, as many trans people, we have, body issues and that. But in the context of COVID-19, there might be an increase kind of body shaming. So we thought, let us engage on that topic. I remember when I went for my top surgery, and I was very concerned about scarring and things like that. And I asked my doctor, how will it look given that, I'm a large body person? She said to me, dear, as you know, life favors thin people. I'm not sure if it's life that favors thin people or it's people that, demonize larger people. But in any case, we will, uncover all these things throughout our conversation. Without any further waste of time, let me give it to Anil to start the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sabu. Thanks for sharing that experience with us as well. I think it really sums up why we're having this conversation. Just a couple of housekeeping rules before we start. First of all, our main rule is, as always, respect. This is a safe space for trans and gender diverse people and for our allies. We ask everyone to respect each other, to respect each other's point of views. We don't always agree with each other, but we always disagree very respectfully. So please respect our safe space. Secondly, in the interests of people who are joining from unstable connections, please can you keep your mics muted at all times unless you're speaking, and your video off, so that we can preserve bandwidth and have the most stable possible connection for people who don't have very strong internet connections. Thirdly, we have an evaluation form that is going to be sent out to participants afterwards. If you could please complete the evaluation form, it helps us to shape our future conversations and to know what we're doing right and wrong with these conversations. Your feedback is greatly appreciated, and we would love you to complete those forms. A podcast of this session will be available afterwards, but we would like to ask people not to record this for their own purposes without specific consent from the participants. We keep our podcast, we record this for podcasts for people who aren't able to join the conversations at the time. But this, as I said, this is a safe space, and we would prefer it if people do not do private recordings unless they have specific consent from the participants. So I'm going to hand over to our panelists today. I'm going to start with Jenna. If you could just give us an overview of some of your thoughts on the issue, then we'll hear from Sandile, and then the format will be, we will go to a discussion and we will get comments and questions from our participants here today. So over to you, Jenna.
Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. So yeah, just to introduce myself before I begin. Yeah, my name is Jenna Bayer, psychologist. And thank you for inviting me on today. I'm truly grateful for this opportunity. Okay, so, in thinking of this topic, the thing that came to mind when I think of fat shaming in comparison with other forms of discrimination, like, racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, etc., is that it's almost as though in society's mind, it's the last sort of socially accepted form of prejudice. In other words, well, it's okay for fat shame because being fat is wrong. So it's as if that gives license to society to do it. But what society doesn't know is that there are cultural variances with weight, and the moment you shame, there are multiple psychosocial, physical consequences, multiple. And to start off with, just to give sort of two definitions I saw of fat shaming. The one says, fat shaming is criticizing or harassing people about their weight to make them feel ashamed about themselves. So you see there, the motive is to shame someone. Again, one more definition: the act or practicing of humiliating someone. The act or practice of humiliating someone's judgment to be fat, overweight, by making mocking or critical comments about size. So again, the motive is to shame them, and that's the point of this. Is that it's not just about weight here. Is that about it's the motive is to belittle, to denigrate, to put down, and to isolate. Because the impact of this is no different to race, gender, sexual orientation, etc. And the reason it's no different is that psychologically, the moment you put someone in a box, metaphorically, or sideline them, or judge them, or stigmatize them, and then once you do that, you trample on their dignity thereafter, that becomes an act of discrimination. In other words, where there is shaming or stigma or belittling, there's discrimination. They are basically cousins. And so in my experiences of dealing with the psychological impact of oppression generally, this shame, this act of shaming results in things like fear of failure, worthlessness, and mostly convinces us that we are unlovable. All right, so what happens psychologically is that when a person is bullied or shamed or humiliated over a period of time by a bully or an abuser or whoever it may be, this persistent bullying can reshape mindset to the point where the recipient of it starts to believe that they are undeserving as a human being, undeserving of love, undeserving of happiness, undeserving of a good relationship, undeserving of a good job, undeserving of a good life. In other words, guys, this is a psychological process called internalized oppression. In other words, a belief that you are less than because of, in this case, weight, a label sort of designed by society, that this is the way you are is not right, and then because it's not right, you are on a lower level than people, or sort of, not taking care of yourself, a mess, But at no stage does society sit back and say, well, wonder what, have we actually spoken to this person? What is their life experience like? What are they experiencing? What challenges do they go through? It's just a straightforward look and jump to conclusion. And so what ends up happening from the and I say in inverted commas victim, because it shouldn't be that way, but the person ends up shaming themselves for failing to live up to societal norms. And that's how the process happens. And from experiences in therapy, the psychological consequences are vast. I mean, I'll give you some examples, especially from sort of high school and university learners that I've helped. Things like, academic or academic deterioration, early morning sickness, because there's that sort of early morning anticipatory anxiety, will I get shamed again? So there's this early morning sickness in the stomach, will I get bullied again? Anxiety, paranoia, you start to think people are talking behind your back all the time. Social withdrawal is very common. Social phobia even. So social phobia, to define it, is a sort of fear of negative scrutiny by other people. And so often what happens is people who have been fat shamed over a period of time end up not going out, not socializing, staying home all the time because of that impact. Other symptoms include nagging self-criticism, just this persistent, I'm not good enough. And it's, I often say, sort of metaphorically, it's like taking a cricket bat and a pillow and smacking the pillow until there's nothing left inside the pillow. That's the damage that this persistent self-criticism where it comes from. Then obviously low self-esteem, and then even suicide. And so from experience, those are common symptoms that I've seen. And of course, definitions of weight are different in various cultures. There are different attitudes towards thinness. But the problem is that when in I guess in a Western society, there all becomes a sort of mentality of we all have to strive for one thing, not take into account different cultures, different backgrounds, different mental health challenges people experience. If a person's experienced years of trauma, if there's a lack of support, if they've had a history of bullying in school, there's no consideration of that, which makes it so dangerous, which makes then, and I have to be honest, the risk of suicide even higher. And so, to people who might be wondering, have you accidentally or inadvertently fat shamed someone else without realizing it, consciously or unconscious? I'm going to give you some examples of some ways in which, some examples of how you may be fat shaming without realizing it. I'll give you some examples just to kind of educate you through the process. So the first one would be mock concern. So things like, feigning concern for an overweight person's health is a fairly transparent way of telling them they should lose weight, and that's not okay. So many people automatically equate being overweight with poor health, but this isn't always the case. They may be in good health. We don't know that. And so assuming that someone who is overweight is unhealthy, has a poor diet, or lazy is prejudiced and insensitive because you simply haven't had a conversation. Then the second form of ways you may be fat shaming without realizing is false surprise. So this is kind of acting surprised or congratulating someone who is overweight for doing exercise is a sort of form of fat shaming. So just because someone is overweight, it doesn't mean that they can't partake in activities that don't involve being active, So of course, overweight people can still do all sorts of types of exercise. So don't patronize by congratulating a larger person, because it can seem patronizing. The third one is kind of sort of subtle wardrobe suggestions. So, suggesting to a plus size friend that they might be more comfortable in jeans or joggers than a tight fitting sort of dress or that kind of thing. So that subtle wardrobe suggestion. By doing so, you're implying that they are unable to pull off certain outfits and must dress in a particular way because of their size. Then a couple more, then diet judgments. So what someone else chooses to wear, do, and eat is completely up to them. But what ends up happening is these sort of unsolicited diet judgments, like I think you should be eating this, or that kind of thing. We don't know what they're going through in terms of their health. Maybe they've got a pre-existing condition that we don't know about. Okay, and then lastly, using the term fat as a negative. So despite the growing body positivity movement, fat is still often used as an insult. This can be particularly damaging if said in front of a larger friend, because it is likely to be damaging to self-esteem. And you also need to be careful when paying what you think are compliments. Remarks like, you look so good now you've lost weight, and you're not fat, you're beautiful. So just, things like that. Be aware of those kinds of things. But guys, overall, the research is clear. The research is clear that being fat is not a choice. This is not a choice, right? And so this is why we must confront cultures who endorse fat shaming, because we basically attacking someone who's not making a conscious choice about it, and that's the point about it. Okay, so just a few more interventions, with regards sort of weight loss. Instead of dieting, maybe focus on eating healthy food. For example, instead of exercising to lose weight, exercise for health, exercise to feel better. In other words, my point is that when it comes to exercise, the main thing is to have a compelling why. Why am I doing this? Is it to live up to the standards of others? Or is it because you want to do it for you, to feel better, to enjoy being active? So that is the most crucial thing. In the process of exercising, whatever it is, why am I doing this? And a compelling why. And is it for me, or is it for other people, just to sort of keep up with the Joneses? You can work with a therapist who is attuned to the psychological impact of fat shaming, and oppression generally. And then lastly, instead of focusing on how you look, you can focus on things like yoga or meditation to view yourself in a positive way. So different ways of focusing on how you feel about yourself, instead of just that sort of what you may perceive as a sort of soul destroying, looking in the mirror every morning and just, again, with the cricket bat and the pillow mentality, beating yourself up all the time. An alternative approach to seeing how you view yourself. There are different ways to do this, but the number one thing, just to round off, is that fat shaming is discrimination. It's discrimination. It's just as simple as that. But it's as if, and to repeat it one more time, it's as if society still views it as a sort of last acceptable form of prejudice, because it's, seemingly different to all the other forms. But I have news for you. It is prejudice, and it is discrimination. Good. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jenna. Thank you for that insight. I'm now going to hand over to Sandile for some more insights onto this topic. Over to you, Sandile.
Thank you, Anil. So afternoon again, everyone. My name is Sandile Ndelu, and I currently work as the Advocacy Coordinator at the Center for Applied Legal Studies at the University of the Witwatersrand. To perhaps just tag on or connect my contribution today to the very insightful and compelling initial contributions that have been made by Jenna, I want to sort of highlight the that, perhaps enter through the insight that perhaps the reason why folks still think that fat phobia is sort of an acceptable space for intervention is because we haven't necessarily lifted up the adverse material implications of fat phobia, implications that relate to health specifically. And yeah, so I want to speak about some of those material institutionalized implications. And so if one zones into specifically the healthcare sector, one of the metrics that are used in order to make an assessment on somebody's weight is what is called the body mass index, BMI for short. And, you know, this is sort of, you know, taken as sort of the Bible in monitoring people's weight. But there are several problems. I think for me, the biggest problem with the use of a BMI or generally weight as a proxy for health is that it's really unreliable. Its reliability is tenuous, and there are various reasons for this. One of them is that the body mass index doesn't necessarily distinguish between muscle weight. It doesn't distinguish, and fat. It doesn't distinguish between bone density and fat. It doesn't distinguish between, or doesn't adequately account for body composition, race, sex. And so it's really unreliable to sort of use as a shorthand to make an assessment on somebody's health. Yet, the healthcare system, not only in South Africa, but across the world, is really predicated on this idea. Another element that I think impinges on the reliability of the body mass index metric is that one's body mass index doesn't necessarily tell us where the body fat is stored. And again, despite some of these controversies which are documented in the literature, generally the healthcare sector still takes it for granted that they can make certain deductions based on a person's BMI. And for example, and this can have you know, dire consequences. At the start of, or at the initial break when the COVID-19 pandemic you know, first visited us, there were talks about possibly doctors or healthcare professionals having to make difficult, quote unquote, difficult decisions about how they allocate their resources. In countries such as Italy, there were you know, lists that medical practitioners had formulated in order to decide should resources become strained, you know, resources such as ventilators become strained and not easily available, who should be the first to be excluded from that healthcare provision, and alongside you know, age and certain quote unquote comorbidities. Comorbidities were people who were said to have a BMI which was over a particular amount. And so essentially what was being proposed, and luckily in South Africa's case, we haven't gotten to this stage in the first outbreak, where basically fat people would be you know, denied particular medical assistance or services based on sort of the assumption that they are at a particular risk of severe disease or even death that is related to COVID-19. And as I've mentioned before, this is completely unscientific. And I think, as you know, Jenna mentioned earlier on, there you can't tell somebody's health by solely looking at their weight. There's various elements that have to be taken into account. And just because someone is of a particular weight or is of a particular BMI, it doesn't necessarily mean that that person is in poor health. And COVID-19 isn't the only context in which these decisions are being made. Material life and death decisions are being made based on a person's health. Decisions around who gets dialysis treatment for chronic kidney disease or kidney damage in South Africa, people who are eligible for various types of transplants, particularly in the private health sector. All of those determinations take weight into consideration. And sometimes, people are asked to lose weight in order to qualify for particular healthcare, perhaps for a particular procedure. And others are, essentially sent home to die. And so this really has tangible material implications. It also has another implication in that fat people aren't taken seriously when they are symptomatic. And for example, say a fat person visits a doctor and they are presenting with shortness of breath. Say for example, the research suggests that there's a tendency amongst healthcare professionals to sort of, brush that off as a symptom of being quote unquote overweight, rather than actually investigating the cause of the shortness of breath, for example. And of course, this sort of misdiagnosis, again, can have dire consequences. You may not necessarily be, diagnosed for something like tuberculosis or pneumonia, on time, because your respiratory, you presenting with respiratory distress would automatically be tagged on or connected to your weight, instead of a comprehensive investigation being made into your symptoms. And this, of course, is not something that's necessarily unique to fat people. We know that there's been testimonies and there's been data and literature on how, for example, Black women are not believed when they complain of pain. And there's sort of this assumption from the medical fraternity that women sort of have a higher pain threshold. And of course, there's, been people, we know that there's been people who've, died of heart attacks because, the attending medical practitioner wasn't able to objectively identify the presentation of the person, and as a result didn't act fast enough. And so I think then to perhaps round off the question, I think that is important is where to now? What do we do? And I think there's several things. I think one, there has to be a concerted effort to build connections and build solidarity between fat people and Black women, the disability justice sort of sector, in order to pool resources and speak back and push back against the materialized or institutionalized fat phobia, misogynoir, and etc. I think there's also, and this work, of course, has to be in addition to some of the more internal work that we do and interpersonal work that we do. I really do think that there's a space and there's a need for us to pool resources and push back, institutionally speaking, against health protocols, against healthcare worker trainings, which placed people of particular weights in precarious positions because of this unchallenged assumption that or having a particular BMI equals to or is a proxy for or is shorthand for being in poor health generally. Yeah, so I think those are some of my initial reflections. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Sandile. That was also really insightful comments and a lot to think about. The thing that struck me with both of those presentations was really how pervasive this attitude is within society of conflating weight with health, and how little scientific backing there actually is for this. Because when I did a little bit, just a very small amount of preliminary research in preparation for this session, the first thing that popped up is that someone had eventually done a study, and quite a large study, looking at weight and mortality rates. And what they'd found was that there was no correlation between being overweight and what was termed in the study overweight, and higher rates of death. And this is not in the context of COVID. This was just a general study that was conducted a couple of years ago in the US. And what they found was that there was, for people with very high body weights and people with very low body weights, there was a higher level of earlier deaths. But this was related to particular conditions that those people were suffering from. And it was not actually related to the body weight itself. And I think that that's very interesting, of how very much these two issues are conflated, and the underlying assumptions are very, very unscientific, and yet it's a pervasive narrative that comes through again and again, particularly in the Western media. And I'm really glad we're having this conversation today to start to unpack it. What I'd like to do now is hand over to the participants for your questions and comments and your experiences on this. If I could ask people to please use the raise hands function on the Zoom, so that we can give everyone a chance to speak. If you're not able to use the raise hands function or use the audio function because of your connectivity issues, please feel free to make comments in the chat group, and I will then read those comments out for the rest of the group to respond to. So if you could raise hands or make comments in the chat, we'll then take your questions, comments, and your experiences on this. And I'm particularly hoping to hear about people's experiences, because I think this is something that a lot of us share and have dealt with in our lives. So over to you, the participants. Is there anyone who has a question or comment? So, as I said, if people are not able to use the audio functions to speak and make comment, or you can't find the raise hands function, you're most welcome to put your comments in the chat, on the Zoom chat group, and I will then read out your comments. While I'm waiting for people to kind of gather their thoughts, one of the things that I've also noted on this was, I think it's an almost universal experience that people have, is that if you're trans and you're going and speaking to doctors about surgery, you immediately get told to lose weight. And I think this is one of the issues where, as Sandile was saying, we need to arm ourselves with information, because there's quite a lot of information on safe surgery for people regardless of body sizes. And I think this is something where we can circulate information, make it publicly available, so that when people are confronting these kinds of attitudes with healthcare providers, they've got the information as ammunition to fight back against this. Just checking if we have any comments that are coming up. So I have a question coming in from Sabu saying, is it true that women would prefer to be overweight as this helps them to pass? So for trans women, is it true that many trans women feel that it's better to have a higher weight because it helps them to perhaps pass better, to be more curvy, to fit in with societal expectations of femininity? And is it the sort of inverse for men, for trans men? So I can't speak for trans men in general. My personal experience for this is that I think there's a lot of insecurity about people's bodies generally. And I think I've heard a lot of trans men talking about wanting to bulk up and have a bigger physique if they're thin, and trans men who have larger bodies talking about feeling the need to slim down and have like narrower hips and so on. I think there's a general sense of body anxiety in a lot of people, but I'd love to hear from some of the trans women here today of what your experience is on this. If there's anyone who'd like to respond to Sabu's comment on behalf of trans women. Okay, I have Leanne's hand up. Leanne, would you like to respond on that?
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
So I think that's an interesting question. And you know, there's a lot of answers to that. I think there's also some other factors that a lot of the times estrogen and the blockers that a lot of trans women on causes a lot of water retention, which also has some challenges for weight. And so, yeah, I think there's that. There is I guess, a greater cultural thing, and I'm sorry if I missed it, if it was already said, that often people who are seen as underweight could be seen to have some illness or HIV or some cause to that. So sometimes I know a lot of trans women, especially those who are on the dating scene and those kind of things, do like to bulk up to show that they're healthy. I know I've heard that comment quite often as well from trans women. But I think with any society, there's no one size fits all, and excuse the pun bias, I said that, and that there are some that really don't want to be. And so I've seen trans men who want to bulk up, kind of thing, especially those that have had top surgery, sort of just, you know, the weight helps with that as well. So I don't think I can answer that question, and I'm not sure, but those are just some quick insights I've had from feedback and experiences.
Thanks so much, Leanne. That's really helpful. I wonder
if I could answer that question.
Yes, Jenna, I was actually just going to ask if you had some comments on that.
Well, you know, it speaks to the, you know, if there's a sole focus, and I'll speak to my experience as being trans, aside from, you know, I'm kind of wearing two hats today, but when in my journey of being trans, where I would sort of crumble or struggle is when my sole focus was on the optics, on the outer stuff, on am I passing, do I look the part, but actually the journey of being trans is holistic in terms of, you know, understanding what it's like in being a woman in society, the challenges women face, sort of not having your voice heard at a table of men in a corporate environment. So the point about transitioning is for my transition was understanding being a woman in its entirety, not just the focus on, well, if I pass on the outside, therefore I'm a woman. I'm only a woman if I'm perceived to pass and I look the part, then I'm a woman. No, that's, yes, that's a help, and it's a big part of it, but that's a slice of the pie. And so that's why the continual message to people who are transitioning regarding weight is self-acceptance, and to have a compelling why. Why am I focused on this weight so much? Is it for me? Am I, and why is what is about my journey of being trans that's so important? Is it only about weight and optics, or are there other factors involved? Do you know what I mean? So again, for me, it comes back to that why. In other words, if I don't quite look the part, if I have shoulders that are slightly too big, then I'm not woman enough. Now that doesn't make sense to me. You know, that is a complete societal sort of dictation, because there's so many factors to this. But if you slightly overweight, are you suddenly no longer a woman? Do you know what I mean? So it's about self-acceptance and your why, a compelling why.
Thanks so much for that. That's a really useful comment. I wanted to ask Sandile, from a feminist perspective, do you think this is something that is more targeted, the kind of using weight as a weapon to shame people? Do you feel that this is something that is still largely targeted at women in our society? And I'd also really appreciate a kind of decolonial point of view on this, because I also think that there's traditionally in Africa, there's been a lot of affirmation of larger bodies, but I think that increasingly there's been a sort of Western media influence that has crept in Africa as well on body shaming, particularly women, on issues of weight. And I would really like you, if you could give your thoughts on that.
I think your assessment is absolutely correct. But I think sort of the supervening principle is that there are really, it varies, right? And, as the good lawyer as I am, I would say it depends. But, and from, a continental perspective, I definitely think that there are differences in terms of how people relate to their bodies. And I think that these differences have been able to hold themselves up despite sort of the onslaught of the monopoly of Western media and Western beauty standards. I think there's definitely been particularly with the body positivity movement, a concerted effort to reclaim that space of our bodies. But I do on the question of whether women are more prone to being fat shamed. I mean, again, I would say that it depends. I think that I don't sort of want to make sweeping generalizations like that, because I think every single person's experience is valid and should count. And I definitely have people in my life who are men who have who faced fat phobia, and this has also damaged them, right? And so and I think it goes back to sort of Western constructs of what is desirable, what is lovable. And in Western constructs, there's the the bodies of men or masculine presenting people are sort of as regulated as women's or feminine presenting people. There really isn't sort of a distinction in terms of that. Of course, I do think because of misogyny, you know, there's a particular concerted effort towards the bodies of women and regulating them, primarily to sort of construct a semblance of desirability within sort of the cis heteronormative logic of basically sort of, you know, women or femmes fashioning themselves to be desirable for men or masculine people. And so there's definitely that culture. And I really want to say that even in, you know, in sort of African cultures, I do think that a feminist perspective should still be applied there, because the reason why perhaps, you know, being of a bigger weight within the African context can be a virtue, can be sort of a demonstration of femininity, really circles back to what African men consider desirable, right? And so had things changed and African men desired, you know, I don't know, slim people, I think again the situation would be different. And so I think sort of both regimes, for me, remain problematic and up for resistance, just because I think that all of them are predicated on what is desirable, what is acceptable for the male gaze, and essentially asking women and femmes to shape and change in order to fit into those constructs, in order for them to be desirable. And I think it's really important for us to, wherever we are in the world, to reinforce the principle that our bodies belong wholly to ourselves, and to push the boundaries of what can be beautiful, and to push the boundaries of particularly how we see our own bodies. And I think this then sort of connects to the question of who we sort of surround ourselves with. I think as Jenna mentioned earlier on, our relationship with our bodies is sort of a learned behavior, and a lot of it is internalized, based on what the outside world perceives of us or expects of us.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sure.
I'll tell you what my concern is. Where I find this is incredibly problematic, and I say this to the trans community, and I really want to entrench this. Being trans is not something you did or something that happened. Being trans is a state of being. It just is. You know, it's like, I'm trans, but I'm also white. I can never say like, am I white enough? You know, I'm white. It just is. So the moment you a certain weight and you're thinking, well, am I thin enough or fat enough to look trans? If you perceive yourself not to be looking the part, you're basically then denying your existence. You get what I'm saying? It just is. You trans. It just is. So the other thing is, the moment it becomes solely about looks, then your very happiness is conditional on achievement or on the opinion of another. Now that is a very stressful life, because A, you'll never know, B, you're not going to know, you may not hear the comments, and so it's just, you know, I like to throw in my metaphors, it's like a dog chasing its tail all the time, that kind of thing. And I think that's the main thing to say. Regardless of weight, you're trans. Whether it's not I'm trans if I look a certain way. And that's the thing to really ram home for me. Because a lot of the weight is about, if I look the part, then I'll be accepted. But the moment you're craving acceptance, the subconscious message you're sending is that people are on a higher level and that you're trying to get onto their level. No, it's about self-acceptance. But are other people accepting you is you sending the message that they are better, they are on a higher pedestal? No, it's about self-acceptance. Okay.
Thank you so much. I think those were incredible comments. Thank you both of you for those. I see that we're in terms of time, we're starting to get into the last few minutes of this. I'm just wanting to check if there's any comments from people, from the participants, from your experiences of these issues, of that kind of sense of always trying to look the part, and if someone's also got those kind of experiences of the self-acceptance that Jenny is talking about, of getting to the point of when you're feeling that you're not looking enough, whether it's thin enough, attractive enough, feminine enough, masculine enough, you're kind of negating your own existence. And I think that's a very, very powerful point. If anyone has experiences on that they'd like to share with us, we would really love to hear that. Okay, so I've got a comment from Leanne saying that agrees with Jenna 100%.
Thanks.
Yeah. If I could just ask, I've got my colleague Kanyesile here, and Kanye, if you don't mind me picking on you, I know that you've done a lot of the work that you've done a lot of focus on issues around self-acceptance and celebrating yourself. And I think that's a kind of theme in your work of celebration of ourselves. Maybe if you'd like to give us a comment on that. And then also just to say, I've had a comment from Nelly here on the chat, which says, what would it then be to be desired? What would be the desired weight for trans women in our Southern African context? In the context of needing to pass as cis, and I think that's connecting very much with the comments that we were making of people kind of holding themselves up to a standard and what is good enough. And maybe Kanyesile, if you'd like to sort of come in on that as well.
Hi, Anil. Thank you so much for the platform. I believe that we as trans bodies, a lot of the times we feel as if either we are too thin, we are too fat, or the hormones is making us, gain some weight. And what is really the desired weight, if you think about it? A lot of the times I work with trans girls who are on the street, or trans women who are on the street, they're homeless, they don't necessarily have the necessary food or the healthiest food for them to eat, or to gain the weight that they need to gain. Some of them are on substances. A lot of the time, some of them have pre-existing conditions. And so in that sense, it affects their weight. So for us to think about the fact that we are talking about body shaming during this time of COVID-19, there are bigger issues that people are facing than to worry about someone's weight, or to worry about my weight. A lot of the times I feel that there is no desired weight. We get some trans women and men who are a bit on the plus size, and then we get trans men and trans women who are underweight. But I think everybody should be celebrated. Each and every person should be celebrated for who they are and what they can represent through that body. So in that sense, Anil, I think it's very important that we celebrate each and every person for who they are, and not necessarily keep them accountable for what the desired weight should be. Some of us want, bigger bottoms. Some of us want flatter tummies. And I'm one of those people that sometimes I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gaining so much weight. And But we need to understand that there's bigger problems out there with trans people than to worry about someone's weight. And I think a lot of the times we also need to open this discussion about body shaming, not just with people outside of our circles, but also people with inside our circles. A lot of the times our friends body shame us, and our friends think that you are gaining too much weight, you are losing too much weight. But we need to rectify them and let them know that as long as I'm happy with the person that I am and the body that I am in, that should suffice for it. As long as I live a healthy lifestyle, as long as I make sure that I can maintain this healthy lifestyle, I think that is what needs to be discussed.
Thanks so much for that, Kanyasile. And I think it really puts it in context of how the narratives develop and the psychological stress that it puts on people. But really, we are fighting a larger, as you said, fighting a much larger battle and of really big socioeconomic issues. And often these are kind of almost divide and rule issues that come in where people are engaged in shaming each other and sort of looking at who is passing and who is looking the part and so on. And we're not focusing on those big picture issues of the intersecting layers of discrimination, of race, of socioeconomic class in our society, and the big picture. So thank you so much for that, and I really appreciate your comments. We've got a few minutes left. If there's any last comments, I'd really appreciate it if people could raise them now. If there's anyone who's got any closing comments. I think if no one else has anything to say at this point, I would like to hand back to Sabu just for the closing and the vote of thanks. Yep, I am not seeing any more hands. Sabu, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anil. You know, there was a point when I had issues with my body, and I talked to this, I think she was a psychologist, and I said, you know, I don't like my body because this. And she said to me, you need to focus on what the body can do for you more than what the body looks like. You know, hard to say, you know, this body does amazing things for me. So instead of sitting there scrutinizing it, how short, how blah, 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 it's not necessarily helping me. Anyway, I want to thank the speakers for today for their insightful thoughts. Of learning, and you know, in the context of lockdowns or when it has been also a space of community. So thank you very much to the speakers, and thanks very much to the organizers of the online space. And I want to thank all the participants. As you might know that every second week we have a topic, and it will be advertised and you will be invited. And yeah, we continue to build our community. Thanks very much to everyone, and have a very good week. Thank you.
Thanks, Sabu. I've just seen that at the last moment, Sammy has put a hand up. And in the interest of being inclusive, Sammy, we really want to hear your comment. If you could give us your comment now, just before we close.
Hi everyone. My network has been really terrible, so bear with me if I'm jamming a little. I am Sammy from Malawi. I'd like to echo on a few things that were mentioned earlier about the people in our own communities body shaming us for various reasons, sometimes not even being trans enough. I personally haven't been very active in the trans spaces because the last time I was in the trans spaces, I noticed that there was a segregation about those who were the bodies, you know, the trans masculine and whatnot, and the rest of us, which is, I'll just say me, I wasn't trans enough. So I feel like this is a very important conversation, especially to have in our circles, because it really brings a lot of us down, and you don't feel like doing much. You don't even feel like going ahead with most of the processes, like the basics you have to go through to meet someone to talk about it. It's really depressing, to be honest. So I'd just like to say thank you for this conversation.
Thanks so much, Sammy, for that. I'm really glad that despite the connectivity problems, you were able to be here today and give your comment. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us. I think that's a really good note to end on, because it kind of gives us also a context of why these conversations are important and why we keep having them. So once again, we really appreciate your input. If you've got any topics that you'd like us to cover in future conversations, if you can please complete the evaluation forms that Leila is going to be sending out to participants afterwards. There's going to be a space for you to give your suggestions for future topics. And we would really love to hear from you on the issues that are facing you. As Sammy has said, we need to have more of these conversations and more of these safe spaces where we can really raise these issues. And so please, we look forward to hearing from you. We will always take your suggestions into account and plan future topics. Thank you again to our speakers. Thank you to Sabu, who has been really helpful, not only here today in giving the welcome and the closing, but also in helping organize the conversation. And then, as always, to the GDX team that stands behind this and make sure that everything happens. Thank you to Leila for all your hard work behind the scenes. And thank you also to Sondre, who is doing the minute taking once again. I really appreciate everyone who contributes towards this. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today, and we look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks' time. Have a good afternoon forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.